It's because you haven't been in enough fights. Let me explain. Now, the changes that led to young men these days being much more self-conscious and anxious and not having as much confidence in themselves are incredibly multifaceted. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything can just be boiled down to one or two little easy-to-digest variables. This is by far not the only reason why young men these days are anxious and unconfident, etc. This is one of the changes that I believe is not talked about nearly enough, and one of the methods that you can use to reverse this problem in yourself. So what is this change that I'm talking about? A historical fact that a lot of people these days really aren't that conscious of is just how ingrained in society fighting was throughout the vast majority of human history. And I don't just mean this in warfare and how, there were these warrior cultures, because there was never such thing as a warrior culture. That's kind of a myth. There were more or less warlike cultures. There were some, like the Mongols, who even to an extent sort of based their cultural economy around just pillaging and raping and all that. But even then they had their herders. A society cannot function if the majority of people are warriors. So it's not that there were lots of warrior societies in the ancient world. More or less warlike, but most people in the ancient world by far were just farmers. However, in the daily lives of those farmers, there was still violence in a way mixed in. There was, of course, battles between little farming families, because most battles back then weren't big, grand-scale national wars. That's the one you read about in the history books. But there were so many little squabbles, especially in the Middle East, especially the further back you go. A lot of little skirmishes that happened between families, blood feuds, stuff like that. But even just in the culture, even when people aren't trying to rip each other's throats out, in the games that they played, in the music that they made, in cave paintings, we see depictions of sporting violence. People refer to prostitution as the oldest profession. I think that's probably not true. I can make a whole entire video debunking that, but I won't right now. But the oldest sport, quite possibly, it's not necessarily proven exactly, but quite possibly the oldest sport, and I think this is very likely, is wrestling. Because in the ancient world, what do you do for fun? You don't have, balls and rules and referees and all this. So you beat each other up. You take sticks, you're like, yay, let's beat each other up. This is so much fun. Oh no, Grok died. And, well, we need some rules for this. Okay, no punching, not that much biting. If you have to gouge eyes, do it softly, because ancient world wrestling didn't have as many rules as modern day wrestling does. But there are tons of depictions in cave painting of men wrestling. It's an incredibly old sport. So even when men weren't fighting exactly, they were fighting. And young men very, very often came up in cultures where there was some, if they didn't all do it themselves, some way that they could go and watch other people fighting in a sporting way, get some exposure to violence, often in a way where they'd be doing at least a little bit of it themselves. Especially if you look in Africa, but in plenty of parts of Asia, and so many other cultures around the world, there's so many different indigenous types of wrestling. It's really just a humongous rabbit hole that you can go down and lose yourself in, because some of them are very wacky and very interesting. And this is far, far from an ancient world thing. In the 1920s, an era where anxiety and lack of self-confidence wasn't really a thing among young men, and we also didn't have the same push that we do currently these days to be peaceful and nonviolent and all of that, boxing was like what basketball is today. It was huge. Millions of young men went to boxing clubs all over the country. Pro boxing was basically the NBA. And this is why I think young men in older times had a much greater mental fortitude than young men currently. At least in part. Like I said, there are a lot of other factors that go into it. But being in a fight, yes, you are pushing yourself physically. And that also definitely does build confidence. Getting in shape and pushing through hard things definitely does build self-confidence. But it's not the same as just going to the gym and running and lifting weights and working hard. Because in a fight, you need to work physically hard, but it's not just do this same predictable thing that's, in a way, becomes part of your comfort zone if you start working out long enough. It's just the thing you do. It's simple. You've done it plenty of times before. So even if it's difficult, it's not necessarily stressful. But with a fight, there's somebody in your face, somebody moving around that you need to track, and you needed to defend against somebody who's trying to attack you. That's basically how your body and brain are going to interpret it, even if it's not gonna be the same kind of stress as if somebody literally has a knife and is chasing after you trying to kill you. to your brain, to your body, there is somebody trying to attack you. And while they're trying to do that, you have to not only stop them, but find some way to do things yourself. So you can't shut your brain off in the same way that you can while lifting weights. You can't just listen to a podcast while you leisurely do your sets of curls, even if it's not that leisurely. So fighting forces you to learn to push down the anxiety that comes up naturally in a situation where somebody is literally attacking you, a natural human instinct to feel fear and anxiety in that kind of situation. And even when these emotions are going on inside of you, because you can't just cancel emotions from happening, you need to think quickly, you need to think on your feet, and you need to move toward your own goal yourself, whatever is happening inside. As well, one of the most important effects of fighting when it comes to self-confidence is that fighting, especially in organized environments such as a wrestling team, a boxing club, whatever it may be, serves as a proving ground, a place where young men can prove to themselves just what they're made of. In older times, proving grounds such as these were built into society. A lot of young men's rites of passage, if you look through rites of passage in the ancient world, because there's so many rites of passage, which we don't have that many of these days, besides like getting a car or something, symbolic menial rites of passage. Back in the day, there were plenty of proving grounds built into the society. A young man, he wants to prove himself, I'm a real man. Well, show us that you can do this. Can you go out and actually hunt an animal? Can you actually, yes, wrestle somebody? I've heard of rites of passages that involved wrestling or some other kind of combat. Society was not only disposed to, but purposefully went out of its way to create a structure where young men could prove themselves, to give young men opportunities to prove who they are and what they're made of, so that they could prove it both to the society overall and to themselves. And this, well, it proved it to society and to themselves. This not only gained respect, at least for the young men who actually were able to prove themselves, and potential for, well, not quite upward social mobility, because there really wasn't that much upward social mobility in the olden times. You were either a peasant or you were nobility, and that was that. But if you prove yourself as a good hunter, as a good fighter, you can get maybe a slightly hotter peasant babe. So there's both incentives, and you can prove to yourself, and society pushes you to prove to yourself. So it's accepted by society as well for you to prove just what you're made of. And I think that proving grounds like this were such a common thing among rites of passage and other societal customs in the ancient world, because it's simply an instinct among men, I think, to want to prove yourself, to want to do things that show other people, but most importantly, show yourself who you are and what you're made of. Now today, what are our rites of passage? You get a car, you get a credit card, you take out a loan and you go to college and you just do more school and you get a degree. Like, it's not really rites of passage that require, in a way, that much input from you, to be honest. Like, you can even go to college without even deciding what you want to study. Plenty of people do, or they pick something like English literature as their major. There's no societal push for young men to really prove themselves in any sort of way. In fact, a lot of the ways that I've mentioned that young men actually can prove themselves, such as boxing, wrestling, things like that, plenty of parents won't let their sons do them. They'll say, no, boxing, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to grow up and become a violent person, as if people who do boxing just go around and they just start beating up on random people all the time. Like, I haven't really noticed that, to be honest. So young men lack both societal direction and opportunities, in a way, to prove themselves. Or even if they do know of opportunities, they've never been taught to think of it in that way. A lot of young men, I think, don't really think of, I'm going to prove myself, but that a lot of social anxiety is driven by, well, I want to show to other people that I am this kind of person. Often, how do you show that you're cool to other kids at school? You show in a way that you're tough, like you smoke and you rap, and all these things that are outward signs of toughness, meant to demonstrate toughness. They don't really actually demonstrate much of anything, but they don't really know what actual toughness looks like, because society doesn't really push them to be tough in any way. So they have to find out what toughness is for themselves. And whenever young kids need to find out for themselves what a value is, they're going to get it wrong. That's something society needs to instill itself. And whenever kids are left aimless, what happens? Anxiety creeps in. They don't have that much direction in life, and they haven't proven to themselves that they're the kind of person that can find a direction for themselves. So it only follows that they're going to feel anxious. Why do young men feel anxious? Of course young men feel anxious. They don't have any of the direction and any of the proving grounds that allow young men in older times to not feel anxious. I personally was never an anxious person. I've been very confident and very tranquil my whole life. It's just an aspect of my personality. But after I started wrestling in 8th grade, I still did see a sort of an amplifying of my confident nature. I just sort of naturally walk with a more confident stride, stand up straighter, speak more clearly, speak my mind the same amount, but like it shows at least a growth of my ego, which isn't a good thing, I guess, but it'll never shrink. But I at least don't speak my mind any less, despite being in plenty of contexts now where I'm sure plenty of people would rather that I don't speak my mind more. But essentially, even though I'm generally a confident person, even coming into it, I came out of wrestling much more mature and much more confident in myself to honestly an annoying degree, and that's something that I definitely have to work on personally. But even coming from somebody who isn't anxious, it had the same effect on me. In summary, society these days does not tend to give young men the social direction and the push towards proving grounds that can show them what they're really made of, that allowed young men in older times to build a much stronger self-confidence than young men these days tend to have. And I personally think that through fighting, specifically through structured channels of fighting, such as Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, whatever it may be, can be an immensely helpful path for young men to find a way to build that same self-confidence themselves by proving to themselves just what they're made of, and pushing through the natural anxiety, fear, and negative emotions that come up when blows are coming your way.